Welcome to Sunday Coffee, Art, Design, and Architecture. A happy Sunday morning to everyone. This show is coming to you from Florida on a gorgeous Sunday morning overlooking the gentle lapping waves on the Gulf of Mexico. My motivation for this podcast channel is to broadcast good news stories, interesting people, and food for thought. So pour yourself a nice hot cup of tea or coffee, take a deep breath, get cozy, and enjoy a break for some uplifting conversations. This morning's guest is Illana Preuss, and her new book is Recast Your City: How to Save Your Downtown with Small-Scale Manufacturing, published by Illana Preuss in 2021.
Good Sunday morning, Ilana. How are you today?
I'm good, and I'm so happy to be here with you.
Well, thank you for being here, and I hope you have your nice cup of coffee or tea with you this morning.
Absolutely.
And we'll get this day started off right with a nice little podcast. I love your book. It's Recast Your City. Can you start with telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. You know, the book is really an outgrowth of so many of my different loves in the world. I even talks about chocolate shops. So my background is in city planning. I came into all of this originally because I've always been in love with downtowns, big city downtowns, small town downtowns. Wandering a place was always a big perk to me. It was something I got to do growing up a bit. And over my years of working in community development, I did a lot of work with communities on how do you get change to happen? How do you bring more housing options or transportation options to a community? How do you get the political buy-in? And it was amazing work to work with a whole bunch of small communities and big cities across the country over those years. Then I got to a point where I realized that we could do all of these different pieces, but if the community didn't have a strong local economy, if there wasn't opportunity for the people who live there now to be able to have a business, have a home, break out of cycles of poverty, address a lot of the inequities that we have in our country, then housing options or transportation options really didn't get us that far. And so I went down this rabbit hole now back in 2013, it was years ago, where I looked at what kinds of small businesses really make the biggest difference for a neighborhood, for its resilience, for the people who live there now, and from an economic perspective to make it a strong place. And I, through a series of events, landed on product businesses, which I call small-scale manufacturing. These are any businesses that make a tangible good that you can replicate or package. One of my shorthands for it is hot sauce, handbags, or hardware, which is an easy way to get there to say it's anybody who makes anything and sells it, not single items like an artist, but at least small batches, artisans, through the supply chain of advanced manufacturing. And about 7 years ago, I started working with communities. I launched Recast City, my business, and I started working with communities across the country to do specifically this, combine these different things I love, which is bringing small-scale manufacturing businesses into downtowns to help those places become strong, be vibrant, be a place that people love. And then we could also do this in neighborhood main streets, or we can do this in other neighborhoods where we're working to bring people together. And so the book is an outgrowth of all of that, because the work that I did in Recast City was an outgrowth of all of the technical assistance I had run across the country before that, and then bringing small-scale manufacturing into that and really diving into the details about how do we build capacity in a community to do this themselves, to learn how to engage these business owners in a really different way than we have done it historically in economic development, and really crossing the lines between economic development and placemaking, creating places that people love, and all of the systems around them to make them happen. And that's the book. The book is a DIY. So that's how I got there.
That's how you got there. Oh, that's so interesting. So let me ask you, how did you come up with the word recast?
That's a great question. It was me and a thesaurus for about 6 months. Before I started my business, I knew what I wanted to be about, and I knew that we had used all of these different terms about communities like revitalization or rehabilitation and things like that. But I wanted to be able to invoke this connection to small scale manufacturing because the work is about both the place, but also the business type. And one day I landed on that word, and it has forever been mine since then. So Recast City was born out of a lot of thesaurus work.
Oh, look, Kate, let me ask you. Let's start with the small scale manufacturing for our listeners. What do you really mean by small scale? And you talked about in your book about it's so interesting to watch stuff being made.
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So the reason that small scale manufacturing businesses are exciting to me when we look at community development is because of the way it works in our local economy. So anybody who makes a product, right? This could be the person who has the famous barbecue sauce, or it could be the person who is making handbags, or it could be the person, I always love to hunt down the local chocolate maker. Not that this is all about food. And it's also somebody who's prototyping a product on site, but might have the full production being done through a contract manufacturer somewhere else. All of these are part of small scale manufacturing. And the thing that's really exciting about it is that most of these businesses are modern manufacturing. They're clean, they're quiet, they're great neighbors. And especially when they're consumer products, if we put them in storefronts, that means somebody can walk by that storefront or walk into that shop and see things made, which is a big draw. A lot in the real estate community, people talk about experiential retail. People are drawn to retail where you are having an experience, you're experiencing something. And when you're seeing something being made, that is a draw because it is an experience and it is unique to that place and that business and that business's story. And so we can put these businesses into storefronts. We can create these opportunities there, and they create this energy in a place that people are so proud of, and they're really proud of their neighbors and their community for what's being made there. The other thing that's really exciting to me about small scale manufacturing is that we have a heritage of making things across every part of our population, right? And if we think about the history of our country and really the historic exclusion of populations, the whole world of our country, our federal government in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, really excluding Black families from being homeowners, banks refusing to give Black business owners loans to rehab buildings after the riots in the 60s. We've had this history of exclusion, very purposeful and systemic exclusion. And so we know that things are still not equal now. We know that there is a huge racial wealth gap between Black households and white households, and that holds true for Hispanic households too. And so if we want to start looking at how do we address these inequities, we have this amazing opportunity in small scale manufacturing because we can help people who know how to make a thing. We can help them learn how to be entrepreneurs, how to be business owners. And then they have the option to scale that business and build wealth for themselves and for their families and for their community. And so it is a kind of business that's really exciting from these perspectives. And the last thing I'll add to that is that especially right now when we're in the pandemic, we had the year that we had, the year and a half we had last year with our lockdowns and all those different pieces. A business that is not completely dependent on in-person sales, but that is automatically, naturally something that sells online, both potentially direct to consumers, but also potentially wholesale, can be an amazing sort of disaster-proof kind of business because it can be in a storefront. It can sell to people who walk in the storefront, but it's also going to sell online. It's also potentially going to sell wholesale. So all of a sudden, it's this very resilient business because it has all of these different sources of revenue potentially coming in the door. And so it means that you can have these businesses in storefronts in neighborhoods or in towns where the incomes may not be that high in that location, but because they're selling online, they're not dependent on the local incomes. They're in fact pulling revenue into the community from the region or from the country.
Oh, yes. So that's taking advantage of all the technology.
Exactly.
Well, I thought that was so interesting. You talked about watching things. And, now for a little while, restaurants have been kind of using that marketing technique. You know, like they open up, you could see the kitchen in the back and see how your food's being made. And I'm like, I think you just need to keep your kitchen clean.
I can't imagine how hard it is. Yes.
But I thought about, like being an artist. I was just out painting for myself, and I picked up a commission because I was just outside painting and people were just mesmerized by it. They just want to talk to me.
Of course. There's a draw, right? The ability of people to make things and to see that skill in real life, live in person, or even during the worst of the pandemic where we were watching things like that online. You know, it's something that people are really proud to be around. They're proud to know people who know how to do those things, and they want to be a part of it. I mean, it is really this very emotional connection that we have to people and places when we're looking at people who make things. And for good reason. It's really an amazing skill when people have the ability to make things. And the challenge usually is not, there's never a lack of finding people who know how to make things. It's the question of who has already started to become a business, even part-time, because the whole world of learning how to be an entrepreneur, of being a business owner is, you know, are you pricing it right? Is there product market fit, right? Or is the product what people really want to buy? Have you figured out your marketing? And there's so much to teach people, and there's wonderful opportunities for it across the country. But you know, there's so much that people need to learn how to go from being the person who has a passion to make a thing and to turn it into a business.
Well, yeah, that's kind of a good lead in. I like this. I'm going to tell the audience it's on page 18. I'm just going to read this. This is a nice little quote here. And Recast Your City is a how-to book. No wonky stuff here, or at least only a little. Just clear explanations and steps with online worksheets available at recastyourcity.com to help you make changes in your community. So okay, I remember.
It really is not wonky. There's a Princess Bride joke in there you can find.
Oh, good. Oh, what page? I'll have to go find it.
I don't remember. You have to find it yourself. Yeah. No, I mean, my whole world of work, I started at a really wonky end, right? I started as an analyst. I was a numbers person. I was a map person. I did computer things that, you know, nobody else could do at the time. And that was my competitive edge. And as I moved forward in my career, I realized that if we made community development and planning and economic development wonky, nobody understood what we were talking about. And the whole world of making things happen in a community is about persuasion, right? You have to show people that this is in fact something that will benefit them, and you have to explain why. And there was a wonderful person I met through my work years and years ago who said, you know, it's 20% data and 80% communications and outreach. And as soon as I learned that from this person, it was sort of this aha moment for me that we have to think about the way we do our work and talk about it in a way that makes it 100% accessible to everybody who cares about their community. And that anybody who's still using wonky terms is really doing it for exclusion purposes. They don't want people to understand, or they don't understand that they're creating a problem. I will grant there are both parties. And so all of my work over the years was really going around first teaching planners and people in community development fields, how do we talk to people in a way that they understand? How do we use individuals' values as a way to connect them to what's going on in an authentic way? And it really transformed the way I did my work over the years. And when I started Recast City, it took me a while to figure it out. But one of the things I realized was that I could write to people in the way that I talk, that I could really engage people in a conversation through what I write. And that's really what the book is. The book is, you know, it is about do it yourself. It is intended to really be the how-to that you can pick up. It's got 5 steps. You know, it's really meant for people to be able to understand why this is important to do, and then how to do it yourself.
Oh, I love that. The who, what, when, where, why.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a good lead in. So chapter 2, why we need a new economic model. Everybody is losing or working really hard to tread water. So what was the old model and what's the new model that you're proposing?
Oh, I feel like we're about to have a test for me about what's in the book. So economic development, historically, we were in many places using the same model we've been using for 40, 50, years. And that model in a lot of cases is what I call big game hunting. You're going to find some big company, you're going to throw a lot of tax breaks and money at them. They're going to move to wherever you are, and they're going to promise extra tax revenues to you because they've moved there. And people talk about direct benefit and indirect benefit. So all the jobs that are going to be created because their jobs are there. Fine. The problem is that research shows that over 70% of the businesses are going to go to the location that they end up in anyway, and that it's in fact not the incentives that communities are throwing at them that are the reason. They're just in fact money losses to that community. The other part is that most places don't win that competition. Most cities and towns do not have any way of recruiting and bribing these businesses to come. So then what do you do? Because the reality is, in a lot of those cases, those businesses will fulfill their 7 or 8 years that they commit to in that original deal, and then they pick up and they move. And this is why the whole international effect of this, right? We had major textile mills and other major manufacturing plants close in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even into the 2000s in different parts of the country. Now we're starting to see that come back to different places, but that's because of the insecurities around shipping, the cost of labor in other countries, and the skilled of labor and the access to technology in our country. But when we look at what makes the biggest difference for these places that aren't going to win the recruiting game, it has to be something that you can build yourself. And the reality is that there are small scale manufacturing businesses in every community. I mean, I tell you, from really big cities to really, really small towns, there are people who make stuff and who either already sell it or want to sell it. And so it's a question about tapping that as a resource. So we have all these other incentives that are going on around, any kind of job grab that you can get from another community. And the other reality is that a lot of these job growth incentives are looking at either recruiting super high income jobs and, you get these other indirect benefits. But the reality is with these other indirect benefits, the other jobs that come are really low wage jobs. As a country right now, we have the highest income inequity we have ever recorded. And that was before the pandemic hit us. Right. And we have a racial wealth gap that white households on average have a wealth that is 10 times that of Black households. And that is both because of the historic inequities that I was talking about before and because of the lack of good paying jobs now. And so we really have to look at, if we want to have economic development in a community, that means everybody. It doesn't mean some people. And so the question then is how do we create more opportunity for more people? And this kind of business that is part of so many different cultures and so many different histories and heritages is there. They're all over the place. They're just these, what I call these hidden economic engines of people with their head down making their thing. And if we can help them learn how to increase their revenues, grow their business, hire 5 or 10 people from their community, and lo and behold, small scale manufacturing businesses generally pay 50 to 100% more than retailer service jobs, those low wage jobs that we're stuck with in a lot of cases, then we're starting to break out of cycles of poverty, and they can help fill our vacant storefronts. So even before COVID hit, we had this contracting going on in the retail spaces, the storefronts, the stores used by the major national chains. They were already consolidating into smaller spaces, into fewer locations for the most part. And with the pandemic, we had so many businesses close their doors last year, and a lot of people are expecting another round of that this year because a lot of the small businesses are really struggling now because they're not getting the same kind of attention that they got last year. And so when we have all these vacant spaces, small product businesses can fill them and do production and retail in that space and create that draw and create that foot traffic. So the economic change is really about how do we invest in the people who we have in our community now? How do we invest in the places, really thinking about it from a place perspective, creating the new structure around them that they need to survive and thrive? And then also, how do we find things that we can do now in the near term, in the next 6 to 9 months? Because people have urgent needs right now. They can't wait 5 years for some big grand plan, and then work towards the big hard stuff. But to really find near-term actions we can take that make a big difference for small businesses and small-scale manufacturing in particular.
Well, it's so ironic. I think it was last week in the Miami Herald here, They did a big article about tech companies and all their promises to bring all these high-paying jobs. Well, when they did a good job, the journalists looked into the real numbers, and they just brought in people from out of the area, and they hired very few locals.
Right. Right. And part of the research shows that that's generally the case. It's something like maybe 30% of the jobs go to local residents. And that's true across lots of job and business recruitment that goes on. And so really thinking, and I think about it, from the perspective of how are we benefiting the people who live in our community now? How are we helping them build their wealth? How are we helping more people access these opportunities? And that, this is really a concrete way to get there.
So, okay, I'm interested, and I have a chocolate shop. chocolate, chocolate and coffee. That's good this morning.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, what do I do? Do I go to my commissioners, or how do you get started? Like, what do you do?
Oh, that's a great question. So it definitely is easier if you have some political buy-in. So if you're a community member or you're a small business owner, going to your elected officials and saying, hey, I matter. And I know a lot of other people like me who make products, and we matter and we demand attention. The reality is that most local chambers of commerce, a lot of them don't even do anything for small businesses, but if they do things for small businesses, they certainly don't look at these micro businesses and that are, under 10 employees and what they might need, because they're unlikely to be able to afford to be members. And so we're really looking at who can be that support. So the economic development director, the elected officials, the chamber of commerce. Every region has a small business development center. They can also be supportive of it. Where your leadership is going to come from is going to be really different in different places. Some of the best local leaders that I've worked with are place-based leaders. So when I worked in Columbia, Missouri, they have an improvement district. This one isn't downtown like a business improvement district, a BID. This is north of downtown on this one area of town called the Loop. And the organization who is responsible for the future development and growth of this corridor really understood that small scale manufacturing could be their competitive edge because they weren't going to be downtown. They didn't want to be downtown. And they were they're right between a light industrial area where people were building cabinets and, in small industrial spaces. And just below them was a residential area where people lived. And so that these kinds of businesses could not only bridge that gap, but could really create a brand and an identity for this neighborhood. And so we see a lot of times improvement districts looking at this, Main Street programs looking at this. And sometimes it's citywide, where a city like South Bend, Indiana says, this is important for our local economic growth and invests in it. Or Fremont, California saying, we know we have really big manufacturing, but we also understand that having a pipeline of medium and small and micro manufacturing will make a big difference to our local economy long term. Or we're a small rural town like Heflin, Alabama, and we have a 3 or 4 block Main Street, and we know we have vacancies, but we also know that our community needs ways to build wealth, and that these kinds of businesses can help us do that as well.
I like in your book too, and I want to let the audience know that you don't shy away from talking about Black-owned businesses and Hispanic and communities that have been left out of economic advantages. And, a lot of folks don't necessarily talk about that, but you really kind of dive into that.
I mean, I feel like I have a responsibility to, if I have the horn for the moment, and I believe something is true, then I think it's really important to talk about it. I think that in many cases, when I bring up a topic like racism, like economic exclusion, I'm not only being an advocate for what I know is right, but I'm giving people a space to do something about it. And I'm working with them on very purposeful actions that they can take to really start addressing these historic inequities and these historic exclusions that are still obviously going on today in many cases.
That's true. And that kind of leads me to another 2 things, is that one of the things in your book I thought was interesting, and this is so true in Florida, is that locals feel left out. We feel like everything is built for the tourists and there's not a lot for us.
Right.
And it kind of goes to just for the reference for the audience is page 59, and you're talking about the Knight Foundation, and the Gallup found that there were 3 major reasons why people stayed in the community, and I'll just let you comment on it after I tell the audience what they are. People feel included. There are places to gather, and the place has beauty in its buildings or natural environment.
Yep, that's it. It was a study that was done now a bunch of years ago that I have always been fascinated by, because they looked at all sorts of different factors, economic opportunity and jobs and things like that. And the fact that it came down to these pieces that you said, right? They feel included, there are places to gather, and there's some aesthetic beauty about the place. It speaks to what we know about placemaking, right? We know it because we experience it. When we feel like we can be a part of something, it changes, it creates an emotional connection to a place. When there's some beauty that is a part of that, it creates an emotional connection to a place. And so I think it's important to think about that as we're doing economic development and as we're investing in different places in our community, and also acknowledging that everybody does, from my perspective, everybody deserves to live in a place that feels worthy of investment, that feels worthy of this kind of beauty. And that sometimes that means we have to fill storefronts, and sometimes that means we have to paint a building. And, there's a lot of different ways to get there. But I think it's important to know that those pieces are part of our basic personal connection to a place, and how we need to design and build out a place and fill it with activity as well.
Well, that sounds okay. You've got a 5-step plan here. This sounds like Economic Anonymous. 5 steps to recast your city. I'll give you a clue here. It's page 73. So, what are those 5 steps? And like you said in the book, like I want to do something now.
Right. So the 5 steps are lead you to what you're going to do now. They're really going to. It is both the short term of what do you need to do now, but it is also the long term of really expanding who you know. And it's important to think about, let me see how I can describe this. A lot of times in communities, particularly for political reasons, we take action. People have a new idea, they take action on it, they get a ribbon cutting, they get a newspaper article. But realistically, in economic development, there is very rarely research or enough research done to know if that's what is really needed. It's based on a whole history of actions, or what they say, is the sort of the best practices. But even with small business, people create programs, and honestly, they never talk to the small business first to make sure that that's what they need. They know that, this worked in another community, so it should work here. And that means that we're spending money, scarce resources, staff time on things that are actually very high risk, because we haven't done any research to know if this is what people need. And this is, in fact, what we've learned from the tech sector. I do take it from the tech sector as something called user research, where you actually go and talk to people about how they use things today, how they behave today, as an indicator to future actions. Not asking them, do you want X? Because if anybody had described an iPhone to us 20 years ago, we wouldn't have known what to say, right? But really thinking about how people use tools, what they're missing. And that's exactly what we do. So the 5 steps are very straightforward. It's about understanding what outcome you're trying to achieve, being really specific about it, including who should benefit from it. It's about building lists, honest to goodness. It's about building lists of small scale manufacturing business owners. And we give folks worksheets about how you go about doing that, but also people who can help you find those businesses that are outside of your personal network, because we all have network bias that limits who we know. And there are steps in there to really break out from your personal network and bring more people into the conversation of why that's important to do that. The 3rd step is about talking to them, one-on-one interviews, small group discussions, a whole specific method, and example questionnaire, in fact, about how you go out and talk to people, particularly small scale manufacturing business owners, to understand what works and what doesn't work for them and what are their biggest needs in the next year so that we can be responsive to them and their needs. The fourth step is analyzing it all. What does it all mean? What did people say? What maybe went unsaid, but might be something that's hinted in there? What are the biggest assets that are there that we really can build on? And this is one of the ways we get to actions quickly, is if we have something that works, if we can build on it a little bit, connect it up with more people, then we can start solving some of the problems pretty quickly. And what are the big gaps? Things that we have to create solutions for, both short-term and big long-term things we have to address. So outcomes, list, interviews, analyze, and act. I do not have a cool acronym for it because I'm just not that cool. I have OLIAA, so that's not any good. And the thing that comes out the other side is really taking action. And that is all about identifying the things that you can make happen in the next 6 to 9 months that really help you build momentum, create these visible wins, bring the small scale manufacturing businesses out into the light and showcase them in certain ways, but then also be building the buy-in for the bigger, harder actions. So I mentioned Columbia, Missouri. When we worked with them, one of the things that we found when we did our interviews with small scale manufacturing businesses was that there were a boatload of food product businesses that people had at home. And they were bursting at their seams, and they also didn't really know how to grow, and they didn't have access to distribution. And so one of the things that came out of that analysis was the need for a commercial shared kitchen. And that could build on one of the assets that we already identified, because on the corridor that we were studying is an old building owned by the University of Missouri that has an old kitchen in it, the kitchen for the cafeteria there. And so if you got the right partnerships in place, it would actually be a very low level of investment to turn that existing kitchen into a commercial shared kitchen that had the health stamp of approval. One of the other things we found from the interviews was that there was a fair need of technical assistance for these businesses, because to work in a commercial kitchen, you have to go through certain food health safety trainings. And you also need to know how to price things and market things differently if you're going to scale like that. And so the Loop in Columbia, Missouri, not only launched the commercial shared kitchen that's mission driven, focused on particularly reaching Black and Brown business owners, particularly women in the community, but they also created a training program in partnership with the local service provider, who was also one of the assets. So sometimes it's really about sort of pooling our assets to fill in some of those gaps. And they were going to open it right when the pandemic hit. And so it delayed them for about 6 months. But they got the commercial shared kitchen open in the pandemic. They opened in January of this past year. So, it is this opportunity to act on things that's an important part of it.
Can you give us any other examples of maybe other case studies that you've worked on too?
Sure. Knoxville, Tennessee is also one of my favorites that I talk about in the book. They have the Knoxville Entrepreneur Center. It's been there for a while. It's a phenomenal organization. And it was initially predominantly focused on tech businesses, startup training for tech businesses, growth and meetups for tech businesses. They still do that. But one of the things that happened now a bunch of years ago was that their mayor joined in on something that Etsy created called that was a sort of mayors coming together to figure out how to build their maker economy. I still don't know why she went. I should have asked her years ago her why for doing that. But one of the things that she committed to out of that convening was to create something called a Mayor's Maker Council. And what it is it's small scale manufacturing business owners who became part of an advisory council to the mayor to help provide feedback about decisions that were going on in the local community, but also for the mayor and the mayor's staff to be able to connect with this sector and understand their needs going forward. And so the Knoxville Entrepreneur Center became the staff for the Mayor's Maker Council, and then grew that whole program. When we worked with them, they were already doing trainings. They were starting to do their first summit conference specific to local product businesses. And one of the things that we helped them do was connect with their local urban league. which they knew each other. It was definitely a friendly connection, but they didn't realize that they were both doing trainings that happened to include product businesses. And so all of a sudden they realized that there was this racial divide that nobody had created on purpose. It was just sort of a happenstance thing, but that they wanted to create programming that made sure to not only benefit all of those different business owners, but really bring together people across racial divides within the community. And so that outgrowth impacted their programming of their conference, the businesses that they highlighted. We helped them look at the potential for new programming because they have an amazingly robust startup programming for small scale manufacturing that they very soon needed more advanced training for those same businesses. So it's really not just about startup, but about scaling up those businesses, which they've done a phenomenal job at.
Wow. And, I'm going to give a shout out to my home state. My family's from West Virginia. Mm-hmm. And when I was a couple years back, I was driving through the windy little towns and I'm like, I know there's a big controversy about coal and I understand, but I'm like, they have all these little towns, these little super cool they're run down right now, but these old little mining, like 2 or 3 old mining, and they're all connected by rail.
Right.
And I'm like, if you're connected by rail, you could do some other kind of manufacturing here.
Mm-hmm.
And
in most of the cases, the small scale manufacturing doesn't even need rail, right? They're getting the big ones are getting shipments on pellets. The really big one might use an 18-wheeler. There's a phenomenal cannoli maker near me who's a 4th generation cannoli maker. He only does wholesale. He gets an 18-wheeler that drops off his flour, right? But he's much bigger. He actually doesn't have. He has a big space. He has maybe 5,000 square feet. But he's on the big end. He's not a storefront. He's in a small industrial area that's close in to the area. But most of these businesses are getting shipments like anybody else. They're getting an Amazon shipment. They're getting, a van delivering things. So the shipping isn't really the challenge for most of these. And it's really about how do we cultivate that part of the economy? And it comes down to 3 major kinds of actions, right? It's small business support. There's all sorts of ways to do that. It's real estate that is both affordable and in a state of good repair and the right size. And it's capital, right? Businesses need money to be able to grow. That might be micro grants, that might be loans, that might be investments. There's a lot of different ways to get there. And which action a community takes under those 3 categories is going to be completely specific to their small scale manufacturers. So the question I get, 9 times out of 10 is, what do I do? And I said, and my answer always is, well, I can't tell you, and we haven't spoken to anybody. And so it really all comes down to what are the needs of the small scale manufacturers in that community every time.
Well, I guess I was just thinking in particular, well, West Virginia particularly, because I know that the roads, it's the mountain state and it's a very windy little state. Yeah. And I'm like, that's an easy way it's already connected. And it's just, if anybody hasn't been there, okay, I'm going to shout out here. West Virginia, we have Bridge Day, and we got voted like the coolest small town in America.
Oh, that's lovely.
And they have tried, but I'm going to send this to all my family and friends up there because I think this book could really motivate them to, because we got so much cool ghost stories and can make stuff up there. And I just found your Princess Bride. Yes. Well, it says here, well, why didn't you list among our assets? Wait, I said it wrong. Well, why didn't you list I'm going to edit this and start over again. The Princess Bride. Well, why didn't you list that among our assets in the first place?
Exactly. And that's what I find with most communities when I work with them. We talk about assets. We talk about all these different, we take them through the whole process. And at some point near the end, all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah. And we also have this, and whatever it is this gem of an asset. And I almost inevitably am like, why didn't you list that among our assets? So I actually, use that.
And, even in the Florida Keys, even the residents down there, I got to send this book to a lot of people. They were talking about that, locals just don't feel like there's a community because it's all second homes.
Right.
And so what about that? It's like the one guy was like, I'm the only person that lives here on my street.
Oh, that would be so haunting to me. Look, I think that there's a couple of different things at play. I think a lot of communities have been sold this idea that tourism is the way that they're going to have a local economy. And I think the best way to deal with that is by showing communities that there are other ways to have, in fact, a year-round economy. So we know that tourism, in a lot of cases, I imagine this is especially true in the Keys, is they want a cute town, right? The places that attract a lot of tourism these days are because there are those things that we talked about in Soul of the Community, right? There are places to gather, they can feel included, there's some beauty to it, but also there's something unique about it. They can walk into stores and see things that aren't everywhere else. They can feel like they're having this very different experience, and that's something special. That secret sauce of that place is what draws people to it and what makes it stand out in a market. If it has the same stores and looks like everywhere else USA, it's not going to help its tourism base. And so when we already know we want that uniqueness in our downtown and in our community, these small scale manufacturing businesses are a way for people to have a year-round economy, right? They can be there in the storefronts when the tourists come, but they can also sell online year-round. And so it really helps a community build a much more resilient local economy. So many of our tourism economies crashed during the beginning of the pandemic. And we know that, disasters are going to happen. And so really figuring out how we build a much more resilient local economy that isn't just dependent on one sector becomes really important.
Well, let me ask you an important thing about money too, because do you talk to people about finding sources of microgrants and money to start the process?
Start the process of a business or this kind of work in a community?
I guess like I'm a small business, say, and I want to do that, and I want to find microgrants and loans. How do you jumpstart the funding process in a community?
Yeah, so the answer is it sort of depends. So we don't provide any direct services to the small businesses. We're really focused on how do we change the whole infrastructure around them in the community across those three things I talked about before: the small business support, the real estate, and the capital. If capital really is a barrier that comes up in a community, which it often does, there's a lot of different sources. There's CDFIs, there's local banks, there's federal programs, and there's a lot of different ways. CDFIs are community development financial institutions, and these are nonprofit banking entities that get funding from a whole host of different sources, but with the intention with the mission and the intention of providing funding loans to underserved communities. And particularly to people who may not be able to get a bank loan because they're perceived as high-risk individuals or that their business sector is high risk. A lot of times, if people come from a community that doesn't have a lot of small businesses, they're just perceived as high risk. So we're just perpetuating this inequity in a lot of cases. So CDFIs are fantastic. Local banks, if it's an area that has any local banks left anymore, they can be phenomenal partners. And then philanthropy. I mean, I think a lot of people are starting to understand. There was an amazing speaker. Where did I hear this? Oh, I can't remember who this was anymore, but it's not my saying. So I want to make sure that it's understood. It comes from somebody else. It was the woman who ran the United Way in Greensboro, North Carolina. And she said to me, I don't want to be in the business of making better poor people. I want to be in the business of helping people not be poor. Which I just thought was a brilliant way to say, like, this is about creating economic opportunity for people no matter where they're starting from. And I just think that there's a really exciting opportunity to do that. And so we have to understand what the barrier is. So there's a program near me where they have microloans. they start at $500. They go from $500 to $5,000, right? And some communities have decided to do those as grants because they're much easier to manage. And it really just depends on the community and what the businesses need and what the leadership wants to go after. But it does take leadership. It really does. Communities that have a ton of infighting in their politics, that don't have people stepping up to take leadership roles, it's really a lot harder because you need leadership, you need political buy-in, you need people willing to say, I'm going to take action and make things happen.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, let's go.
I can think of so many small towns in Florida. That happened in Destin, Florida. It was a small little fishing village. And then, like you said in your book, like it just hyper growth and quick buyouts. And it just lost all of its character.
Yeah. Yeah. And it works. It's for the big cities too, right? I mean, you think about Orlando or Tampa or Miami at a neighborhood level, right? How do we make sure that we're really supporting the people who are in the neighborhood now to build their wealth so that they aren't displaced as the hot market grows, or that we're really creating opportunity. I was just in Tampa's downtown for a conference. There are very few stores in downtown Tampa. How do we create opportunities in those lobbies, in those buildings for small businesses to grow? How are we supporting those businesses in the neighborhoods that are around downtown, in the neighborhood main streets? There's tons of opportunities for this in big cities and small cities as well.
Well, Ilana, it was so nice to have you here this Sunday morning, and my cup of tea is just about gone. I know we've taken up a lot of your time, and I really appreciate it. Can you tell the audience, what projects are you working on now?
Oh, wow. I'm sort of all over the country right now. So I work with the communities in two major ways. One way is one-on-one with communities. It's a 4-month intensive. It's called the Recast Boost. And I'm working with 2 communities in Pennsylvania right now on that, Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and Chester, Pennsylvania, which is really exciting. And the other way that I work with communities is through our cohort program called Recast Leaders. And that is where we bring 5 communities together in one cohort. Think of it like a business cohort, but this is for community development and economic development. Each community builds a team of 3 or 4 people, and we train the community leaders how to do everything in that book at a pretty deep level, coach them and mentor them through going to do the work themselves, help them build their own action plan, and then in the second part of the program, support their implementation of the work. And so with Recast Leaders, we're working with a group of small towns in Indiana through a sponsored cohort by a regional entity there called Radius. And then we have a national cohort that includes a whole bunch of towns in the Northeast and Midwest as well.
Oh, I got to figure out a way to bring you to Florida.
I would love that. I'm actually about to announce open applications for our Recast Leaders cohort for 2022. And it's open to communities across the country who really want to take action, really want to make things happen. And it's really exciting to be able to bring communities together who are all rooting for the same outcomes and also see them support each other to get there. So it's been a pretty exciting year.
Oh, well, that sounds like a good note to end it on. Well, again, Ilana, thank you so much for being here on this Sunday morning. And I hope the audience enjoys that last sip of hot cup of coffee or tea. And maybe we'll be chatting with you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me today. And for anybody who's interested in getting that first chapter of the book for free, to get a little taste of it, you can go to the book's website, recastyourcity.com. And I hope you enjoy it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank all of you for listening in today to Sunday Coffee, Art, Design, and Architecture. And the book is Recast Your City, How to Save Your Downtown with Small-Scale Manufacturing, published by Illana Preuss in 2021 by Ilana Preuss. And join us again next Sunday morning here from the gorgeous beaches of Florida with your nice hot cup of tea or coffee. And we look forward to connecting with you soon. Thank you so much.